So, I just want to get a preamble out there right off the bat. This is not quite a normal rumination, nor do I have any intention to do a normal rumination of this game. But there are certain things about this game I really wanted to talk about. And so, right off the bat, I'm not really going to be talking about the gameplay or the combat in any real functional sense. You know, it's a Grand Theft Auto. I could talk about the way the driving is different. I could talk about the way the combat seems utilizing code from Red Dead Redemption, etc., etc. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about. Similarly, this is full-on spoilers all over the place, flinging spoilers all over the place. Now, a game like this, that's all I'm going to say. So if you want to not have that, or you're not interested in that, now would be a good time to go ahead and hit the close button, and hit the dislike button, and then hit the punch Arshian guy in the stomach button, and we'll be good. So, I knew pretty much about halfway through this game I'd be doing this video. I've kind of had this in mind for quite a while. I tend to be able to predict things like this fairly accurately. And I'm trying to think of the best way to possibly explain myself here, so forgive me for failing. It's funny, if you'll forgive me for segueing for just a second. Earlier, I was practicing. I just finished the game, and I was doing some dishes and stuff, and I had the thought that I wish I could have been recording while I was thinking about what I was going to be saying, because my first thoughts always tend to be a little bit more genuine, but then again, I have a chance to think about them a little bit more and maybe process them slightly better. So let's just get on with this. I'm going to stop delaying. Grand Theft Auto 5 follows in the grand tradition of Grand Theft Auto 4 of basically having a very similar, let's just call it a negative outlook and leave it at that. But unlike Grand Theft Auto 4, Grand Theft Auto 5 is all about the concept of what I like to call resignation, okay? Resignation is hard to explain properly because it's one of those things that sounds like kind of a duh, but most people I know don't actually think about it enough to really process what I'm saying. Resignation is not depression. Things are bad. Things are unpleasant. Things are horrible. Things are getting worse. Resignation is the idea that things are bad and probably getting worse, and not actually putting forth any effort into trying to alter that because you can't. The idea of resignation is that you are already at the peak, or already have been at the peak, and you'll never be there again. Things will never get better. It is what I consider personally to be the worst aspect, the worst, the lowest, the most severe aspect of depression or negativity. Now, that sounds kind of bad, but the entire game has been about this. Every single thing in Grand Theft Auto 5 has been emphasizing this point over and over and over and over and over. Every mission, all the dialogue, all the characters, all the side characters you interact, everyone has been drilling this point into the heads of the players as they're going through, and emphasizing over and over and over, there's no point. There's no point in living, there's no point in trying, there's no point in anything. It's all screwed. The characters themselves actually say lines similar to that in case, we are all screwed. Well, they use more vulgar language, more vulgar language, of course. Now, I made a couple of predictions about what the ending was going to be. I ended up being wrong, but at the same time, I ended up being right in one way. One of the things I've always enjoyed is gameplay and story integration, and Grand Theft Auto 5 actually manages this in a rather amusing little way in its final little outing. For those of you who don't know, after you do the big union job, that ends kind of badly, and then you are approached, and then you have a choice. We're going to cover the bad endings first, and yes, I'm going to use that terminology. Number one, we're reasonably certain that the canon ending is in fact the one that is option C. That's what I'll be talking about last and most extensively. And number two, and most importantly, when you... A bad ending is not necessarily a a negative ending. It's just an ending that is considered to be less complete, less fulfilling. It's designed. It's a concept, a video game concept, where you have not done everything. You haven't 100%ed. You haven't collected all the coins. You didn't kill this guy, or you made this choice incorrectly, or whatever. That says you didn't get the real ending. Which is usually referred to as the good ending. So A and B are without question bad endings in this terminology. And they're both monumentally depressing. The one that really caught me was the one where you killed Michael for two really big reasons, and I really want to cover these. First of all, when you go out to meet Michael and you're preparing to kill him, and he's like, "Hey, hang on, I got something on the phone," and he talks about how his daughter has entered college. I know some people would probably decry that, and there's a decent reason for that, but let me talk about that moment for just a bit. As a writer, it's difficult to get across in a short moment. I call them snap moments, like this. I was actually just talking with a friend of mine about this. You want to convey a large amount of information just like that. Whether or not the person or player or viewer or whatever necessarily thinks about it isn't relevant. What's relevant is they get the point. The point that is gotten across with that simple concept, with that simple phrase, she's gotten into college, is that she is trying to make something of herself, rather than trying to keep doing this. Well, let's just not talk about it. Rather than doing the thing she's been doing, she's going to try and actually accomplish something with her life. Now, you could argue that given the way the world is, that's not how it actually works. That's not the point. The point that was trying to be conveyed is she is actually accomplishing something, and her father is so proud and so ecstatic about that. He is so happy about that. That's such good news for him. Now, that was done not for pathos. This is the important part, okay? That was not done to try and make it sting more when you kill him. That was done to emphasize a much more brutal point. That it doesn't matter. That's really what I've been talking about and what I will continue to talk about. The idea that it doesn't matter. That Franklin and the player character and the world and everything simply does not care that things are going better or different or anything. It doesn't matter. Franklin didn't care that Michael's life was starting to turn around. It was his purpose to kill him. I'll talk about this more when we segue into the third ending, but I wanted to emphasize that point. The second point, after you do successfully kill Michael, you have a thing where he calls Lamar on the phone. We don't hear Lamar's side of the conversation. It might actually be a voicemail. But it's a very important conversation because he actually does quote verbatim in several lines something that Michael had said earlier, much earlier, when Franklin approached Michael and said, what went on with Trevor? What went down? Blah blah blah. And Michael was defending himself. Remember? Now this is really interesting to me. One of the things I like to say, this is obviously not 100% true, is that we defend ourselves when we know we're doing wrong. Whether or not we choose to do that wrong is irrelevant to this point. We defend it because we feel bad about it. Whether or not it was actually bad or was actually wrong is also not relevant, if you understand what I mean. I could feel bad about having a couple of donuts, but this is a bad example, but just bear with me. But if someone confronts me about it, I might try to defend myself. And you know what I mean? I'm not just saying defend myself in the neutral term. Being defensive, being, clamping up and, trying to get confrontational and whatnot. You know what being defensive is like. People do this every day of their lives, including me. I try very hard not to because I hate it. But Michael gets all defensive about this because whether or not it was true or not, he feels guilty about what he did. He thinks he did wrong. Doesn't matter if it was or not. That can be debated a billion times over there. That's why I keep gesturing. It's over there. Ignore it. But Michael felt it was wrong. That's why he got defensive about it. And so he tosses out all these things in this defensive nature, about, pseudo-philosophical and talking about, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do to survive, blah, 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 right? And so you get where I'm going with this. Franklin then turns around and says those same things to Lamar. Yeah. I don't even know what else to add to that. But the idea there is very obvious and at the same time very subtle. It's one of the things I like about Grand Theft Auto's writing in general ever since, I'd say about San Andreas is when this really started, but 4 really shone for this, and 5 has too. Their writing is simultaneously very overt and obvious, while at the same time having layers of subtlety that you don't really catch unless you're really thinking about it. 4 is my favorite example of that so far, but I don't want to get too much on a segue here, so let's just get into this. While it's incredibly obvious that Franklin felt bad about what he had to do, and the cycle had repeated, so to speak, The idea here is actually not so much that the cycle repeated, but the fact that the cycle doesn't matter. That none of it matters. That it doesn't matter that Michael killed Franklin, or Franklin killed Michael, or Michael killed Trevor, or whatever. It doesn't matter. The world will keep chugging on just like it always has, and all these lives are irrelevant. That's the subtle point. Let's look at the other ending briefly. Because the other ending just emphasizes everything I just said, but it really does so in basically the same way, except this time Michael's alive and Trevor's dead. And Michael, as he's leaving, basically can't seem to bring himself to shut up. And the reason why is so obvious. Again, it's that defensiveness. He keeps telling himself over and over, I can't deal with this, I can't take this, I can't do this, this isn't me, blah, 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 blah. He just keeps emphasizing it over and over and over, trying to convince himself that he made the right choice. But whether he was convinced or not, well, I guess I should say, whether it was the right choice or not, it's obvious he didn't think it was. Because he was being so defensive and so confrontational and so objective about it, and just constantly. And then he gives the line. Now, this line literally defines Grand Theft Auto. This one line is the whole game in one line. It's the best summary I could ever come up with for it. To survive is to win. That one line expresses so clearly and so decisively that resignation, that depression, that pointlessness, that futility that the entire game embodies from back to front. To survive is to win. The more you think about that line, the more it makes sense. I don't want to go too far into that, but just think about that for a minute. Think about what that means. Think about what that implies. Think about the mindset that requires. Think about the mindset that engenders and then layers as others have to accommodate. It's horrible. I was warned about the depressing endings, thank God. Pax beat the game before I did. And he knows me, and he knew that I probably wanted to go into that with some warning. I did, thankfully. So when I saw that option, the A, B, and C choice, I don't know if you know this, but the A choice, it's, I actually can't remember which one, A is Michael or whatever, B is Trevor, C is Death Wish. That was such a culmination of this game, and the way it has progressed, and this series as a whole, that I chose that so quickly and without hesitation, but not unthinkingly. Here's the interesting part. It occurred to me as I was doing the mission that many people, many gamers especially, would view that as the obvious choice. Because we as gamers are used to the idea that when you're faced with an impossible situation, and you can do the safe route or you can do the hard route. The hard route's the correct route, quote unquote. The hard route's going to succeed. Because that's just the way it works, because in general, the PC in virtually every game ever is someone who is exceptional. That's actually what makes them the player character, or indeed the plot character, as I like to call it. But that's been a trope for forever. It's been slowly overturning in recent years. One of the things, now I'm not saying whether it should or should not. I just wanted to mention this because it occurred to me as I was going through that wasn't what I was thinking. Now here's the spoiler. Yes, it does work out. We don't know what actually happens in the long run, but my point is, I wasn't thinking it was going to work out. I didn't think it was going to work out when I chose it. All of Grand Theft Auto 5 talks about what I like to refer to as a system, or indeed the system, if you prefer to be so grandiose about it. The idea that it's hard to point to an individual and say it's your fault. In fact, it's impossible to do so with accuracy. Even the big players in this thing, like Steve Haynes and Steve Jobs, I can't remember his name, Norton something. I just killed him, I can't even remember his name. Even them, all you can do is point to them and say they're just another cog in this system. They're a large cog, but they're still a part of this system that exists to grind people down. There's people who exploit it, there's people who try to get away from it, there's people who are just doing their jobs every day. In that last heist, I chose the option to go ahead and use the guards hostage, the subtle route, right, not the drilling route. And there was a gentleman on that named Casey. I remember that name because I actually kind of liked his character, and he did a good job with it despite having a small role. He is exactly what I'm talking about in its own way. Now, this is a weird case of it, but I wanted to stress this because Casey is just doing his job. He doesn't care. He cares about his own existence, of course, and he's probably, I'm not saying he's a terrible human being, but my point is he's just doing his job. That became such an anathema to humanity post-World War II. For many, many years, I was only following orders, is what it was called back then. And it was so decried as an excuse because what they were doing was so apparently, obviously, incredibly overtly terrible. It's a lot harder to decry that kind of excuse when all you're doing is filling out forms, or driving a truck, or making hamburgers, or loading a boat, you know? Every single one of those people exist as part of this system, but you can't point to someone and say, it's your fault. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. Now, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. Forgive me. But I really wanted to emphasize this point because it was my assumption, based on the way the game was structured, that the only possible way to escape this system, to escape this inevitability, this futility, and this resignation, is to snap and choose to bow out in the only way that was possible. That's why I chose the Death Wish option. Knowingly and willingly. And I did fully expect that it would end in the death of the protagonist, and I chose it anyways. I would much rather die than exist in such a miserable and pointless life. I wouldn't even call that life. That's not even existence. That is a survival. That is survival. Just like it said. To survive is to win. No. I cannot disagree with that more. It's opinion. While I was doing the third mission, I had Defiance, my suicide mission variance remix, playing on loop. It was incredibly appropriate. I died multiple times on that, not in the assassinations, on the raid at the Foundry. Granted, I'm not the greatest player at GTA 5 in the world, but one of the things I liked about it was the deaths never irritated me. They never frustrated me. You know, I've talked about that before, the difference between being irritating and being difficult. That was difficult. Never once did I get, oh, God, I can't believe I died again. It was more like, you know, I was pumped. I was ready. I wanted to get back into it. This was emphasizing to me the severity of the situation. In fact, the first time I died, I actually thought, what I genuinely thought was going to happen was, you know, the character I was playing would die. X. That's the end of them. We move on to the next character, you know, and the last two have to last stand until they die. I mean, you know, anyone's played the end of Crisis Core kind of knows the general concept of what I'm thinking of here. Another beautiful ending, by the way. Moving on. So we kill them, and and then they chose to do something that admittedly had occurred to me. And they even talk about this. I'll get to them. They chose to go ahead and they call it cleaning house. You know, whoops, sorry about that. They go ahead and decide to go and violently remove all of the objects, all of the cornerstones of the problems that are arrayed against them. And that might not work out long term, but they don't care at this point. I'm going to talk about the characters really quick, if you'll forgive me. Michael is an interesting and fascinating character because he is at his heart a hypocrite. Someone who constantly thinks one thing, tries to pretend that he should think another. You know, the self-loathing, the doubt, all that stuff is all because he thinks one thing and thinks he should think something else. And lies constantly as a result of that because it's just he's so accustomed to it. It's called a seared conscience is what is the term we used to use for that. It's when you just don't even think about lying anymore. It just comes out. Nothing emphasizes that more than when he was actually lying to Trevor right there at the grave while Trevor's already digging it up. It's not like the lies are going to help at that point, but let's move on. But at the same time, Michael is someone who has on several occasions, I'll give you a specific example in a moment, mentioned how he regrets what he did. Not the heists, not the robbery. That was his life. That was what he chose. That's what he wanted. And he wanted to live that lifestyle. That's why he was so miserable. That's why he never put effort into his family or into his retirement. He just sat around being miserable because he wasn't living the life he wanted, which was that life of violence and degradation and thievery. That was who he was, and he was trying to deny that. There's that hypocrisy again, right? But over the course of the game, he comes to realize that he actually does care. And ironically, it's Trevor who really demonstrates that to him, and to an extent Franklin as well. And it reaches the point where he is willing to honestly give his family a shot, actually try. And then something interesting happens. He gets that movie deal. We've all had this, or will have this in our lifetimes. The concept of something that is truly appealing as far as a long-term, what I like to call a career. There's a difference between a job. Even a long-term job is still just a job. I'll explain my terms briefly. A job is something you do for a paycheck. That's it. Work is something you care about, and a career is a long-term work thing. This is what you want to settle in and work on, not job, work on for the rest of your life, and, probably make some money off it if that is necessary. We all have something like that, or will, like I said, have something like that where we either have the thought or the opportunity to pursue something that truly interests us, truly catches our attention, truly catches our imagination, truly piques our fancy, and it's just, yes, that's what I want to do. That's what happened to him with that Hollywood deal. That's what happened to him with that movie. And maybe it wasn't a great movie, but that's not the point. He moved in there and he wanted to be a producer, and the voice actor did a brilliant job of it. You can just see his face light up as he realizes this. This is a life that isn't that horrible, violent life that may endanger my family that I can go for. And from that moment on is when he really starts to turn around. That's when he really starts to go ahead and push. He's going to give his family a chance. He's going to try to make a normal life work. He's going to try and make this whole, I'm going to be a movie producer. I'm going to do this. This is going to be great, And the interesting thing about that is he's, on some level or another, aware of all this, but he feels so guilty about what he did, and Trevor never lets it go, and so Michael can never actually let it go either. Let's stop talking about Michael for a second, though, because I think that's all that I really need to cover about him. Franklin is also interesting in his own right, because Franklin constantly talks about trying to better himself and improve his situation and position. As weird as this would say, if you asked me my personal opinion as who is the most evil of the three characters, I would say Franklin. You're probably looking at me kind of weird. Let me elaborate a little bit. Franklin is someone who, again, puts on airs, as I like to say. He's got the mask on. He's trying to better himself and all that. But at the same time, when he doesn't need to or have to, he has absolutely no problem presenting himself as he is. I'd say about 50% of the time, 40% of the time, is completely apparent about the fact that he is a violent, brutal, vicious individual, and who is pretty much solely interested in himself and his situation, because his whole bettering himself thing, I've talked before about this concept. When you see someone who wants power or money or whatever, usually this is generalizing, there's two types of people that fit into that category. There's someone who wants the power. They want to rule. They want to be the person in charge. And for whatever reason, like Arcturus Mengsk in StarCraft wanted to rule. He wanted to be the one in control. And then there's the second type of person who seeks that type of position and that type of power, but not because they want to be in control, because they want the benefits of that power. They want the benefits and that. I'm actually failing at coming up with a good example of that off the top of my head. Forgive me. But Franklin is in the latter category. Franklin wants to better himself so he can have the benefits of that, so he can see reap the rewards of that, and he aspires to be the kind of person that Devin Weston, that was his name, Devin Weston. He aspires to be that kind of person in his own way, not exactly, but in that position. You follow me? Not because he wants to be in control, but because he wants to reap those benefits. Interestingly enough, and I could give examples of specific situations where Franklin has shown that he is more than willing to turn on his allies and his friends and cares for nobody but himself. But the interesting fact here is that there's two moments, when it becomes clear to me, based on the way that they're performing and based on the way the writing was, that this is also hypocrisy. Because despite all those things that he doesn't like about the Hood and about his friends, his homies as he says it, Franklin genuinely does feel that bond of togetherness, that friendship, that, homies, There's family. He says that word for word, actually, in the ending scene. I'll talk about that in a moment. But these are his family. There's a reason he keeps going to help Lamar. There's a reason he watches out for Trevor and Michael. When it's in the moment, when it's instinct, when he doesn't have to pretend or think about it, he just goes, "Yes, I'm here to help you." And then he thinks about it and says, "Oh wait, this might. I need to think about this. This might bounce back on me." Then it's funny because I call him the most evil, but at the same time, I think that instinctually he is one of the better of the three characters. It's very strange. It's a very interesting dynamic. I found him very fascinating. But nowhere did I like that more than... Forgive me for skipping ahead here because I haven't talked about Trevor yet, but there's a scene... I played Franklin first, and he went to pick up Lamar to go kill somebody. No, he picked up Lamar to go to the foundry. That's right, excuse me. And on the way there, he calls Lamar. This is so fascinating to me. He calls Lamar and he says, I got a screwed up situation. I've got something horrible and terrible. Can you come and help me out or whatever? He doesn't even say that. Actually, I'm saying this wrong. I really got to say this properly. I want to get the subtleties across. Sorry, I just got a message on Steam, which distracted me. I really want to get the subtleties across here. He says, I'm in a screwed up situation, and Lamar immediately says, well, who better than me? I'm paraphrasing because I don't cuss that much, but who better than me? Who better to help out than me? I'm your man. And Franklin says, that's great, that's wonderful, that's exactly what I need. I'm coming to pick you up right now. And Lamar says, you got it. Something about that made me want to cheer. And I had to think about it for a moment to really analyze what it was, because Lamar is one of those interesting characters that really only has one major flaw. I'm not talking about the general violence and drug problems and lying and all the horribleness of standard GTA. That's like saying a human being's flaw is breathing. There's no real reason to mention that. What I mean is that Lamar only has one real flaw, and that's the fact that he's an idiot. But that's it. He genuinely does care about Franklin. He genuinely does want to help. He was there like that. And when Franklin says we're going down to help these people, Lamar's like, you got it, I'm with it. I'm definitely on your side on this. Without hesitation. I've said this before. When you are at your worst is when you know who your friends really are. Think about that. Earlier on, Franklin was approached by his ex-girlfriend, who he's constantly been trying to get back together with throughout the whole game. Not a major thing. They did that very well. I don't want to get off a tangent. And she says something that basically is paraphrased: "If you don't go to help him, you are a worse person than I think you are." I liked that, and the way he just he's doing this. I mean, he's literally the characters. And he's thinking about it, and that was the moment when Franklin started to turn on. I mentioned the moment for Michael earlier. That was the moment for Franklin. That was when Franklin realized who he really was, that he wasn't this evil, corporate, backstabbing, hypocritical, sadistic, whatever, horrible individual, that he actually cared. And so he got up and he went. He went. He called Michael and Trevor and said, this is important to me. He called Lester, actually, I think. But you get my point. He called it, this is important to me. Back me up. And they backed him up. Let's talk about Trevor really quick. And by really quick, I mean not quick at all. Trevor is a truly fascinating individual because he is a vile, repugnant, unpleasant, disgusting animal. I refuse to call that thing a human being. But he is also very interesting because it is very heavily implied that he has mental instability, genuine chemical mental instability. Now, for anybody who doesn't know this, fiction tends to generalize and romanticize mental illnesses to make them look more appealing than they are. In real life, and this is speaking from personal experience, I don't even like to talk about this usually because I don't like trying to give attention, negative or positive, to this sort of thing, but forgive me, I need to make this point. In real life, mental difficulties, mental disabilities, mental problems, chemical problems are a horrible, unpleasant, sad thing. And based on the way Trevor was portrayed, I have no doubt that he was in that boat. Trevor was not wanted or loved or cared about or anything by anyone until Michael came along. And Dan. Or Dave, or whatever his name was. Brad. That was it. Brad. Until Brad and Michael came along. And for the first time in his life, Trevor had a friend. Now, That may sound corny and cheesy, but I want you to genuinely think about that for a moment. I want you to picture yourself. I want you to put yourself in the mentality of someone who has been, and this is your perspective, that's important, who has been ostracized and hated and reviled by literally everyone your whole life until finally someone comes along and likes you, cares about you, puts interest in you. I know a lot of things like to use the power of friendship and whatnot, but I always feel that in real life, what a real friend is nevertheless incredibly important and impacting, life-changing, I would even go so far as to add. Trevor genuinely cared about Michael. Now, with the way things went down, obviously Trevor just descended, and it is my opinion that Michael's death was a huge impact onto why. 10 years I grieved, he said. I've said, forgive me by the way for the repetition. I know I talked about a bit of this on my stream, but Trevor really cared, and he shows this constantly. One of my favorites is if you look close, there's actually a tattoo. I think it's on his left arm that says "Rest in peace, Michael." He actually got that tattooed on his arm, and when he comes back, when he confronts Michael, and Michael's like, "What do you want? What are you here for? Money? Are you here for a fight?" Because Michael is just, it doesn't know how to deal with this, doesn't know what to do. And Trevor, and this is so funny because it's so easy to see their two perspectives, because Trevor doesn't think like normal people. Trevor says, "I'm here for you. I came here looking for you." That line says it all, if you'll forgive me for being blunt, but he just keeps, this is re-emphasized several points throughout the story. Trevor, in Michael, had a real friend. Something he had never had before and never had since. Speaking personally, I would treasure that a hell of a lot more than just about anything else, especially from that perspective, from that mindset. Now, the other interesting thing about Trevor is that he is... How do I put this? He just won't let up on the whole thing about Michael betraying him, as he sees it, or real, it doesn't matter, 10 years ago. He does so to the extent where he actually leaves Michael in a situation where Michael will probably die. And yet, the way he acts around Michael in every scene after that really emphasizes a point to me. Forgive me for not giving specific examples, but I feel that from that point on, he regretted that choice. Not necessarily because he cared for Michael, even though he does, but because there would be no closure for Trevor if he had let Michael die there to the triads. I know that's a bit of a buzzword, and people like to throw that word around, closure. But what closure really means, it's a real thing. It actually matters. It's the culmination of this process of a situation within your mind and within your emotions. If you do not have closure on something, to some extent or another, that will be there, pestering or bothering or agitating to whatever extent, minor or severe, for the rest of your life, as long as you remember it, as long as you are still capable of perceiving it. And I think that Trevor would have just descended into even worse displays of madness and anger and rage after that. Nowhere is that more emphasized than when we're in this final mission. Yes, I'm finally getting back to it. And Michael and Trevor are literally staring off at each other, guns raised. And Trevor finally, he rages. He finally puts his gun down. He's like, "God, fine, yes, fine, I'll put the gun down, whatever." In that moment, I could see so clearly that Trevor was so enraged and so angry because obviously he felt hurt and betrayed by his friend, but he himself could not let go of what that friendship had meant to him. And he wanted that back so badly. And he had no idea how to do it, based on how he felt, based on everything. And over the course of this mission, if you pay attention, Trevor and Michael, for the first time since, the truth was found out, start to get along a lot better. Until it reaches the point where at the end they actually are finally amicable again. I'd like to take an aside for a moment and say that I wish Michael had just grown some balls and apologized. And in case you're saying that wouldn't have fixed it, I'd just like to point out the fact that we already know that that probably would have fixed it within the game. Most people, when the other person genuinely apologizes, genuine, by the way, not just saying the words, but genuinely apologizes, that it's easier to forgive them and move on. But we actually see this in the game because at one point in the time, Michael is accused by Trevor of thinking only of himself, and Michael thinks about it for a moment and says, "You're right." And he's, with this like dawning realization, "You're right," and he apologizes genuinely, and Trevor just completely. It's like, oh well, okay then. Let's it go. Fix. He's, yeah, okay, right. I'm with you. Let's go. I mean, it wasn't like camaraderie, buddy, buddy, but that's not what real life is like, anyways. It was very fitting, I think. I just wanted to mention that. I had to mention that. So let's get back to the mission of our three protagonists here. The culmination of gameplay and story integration is something I always enjoy. Let me take a moment and say that. Excuse me. The ending of GTA 5, the C ending, the final mission, was exactly what a climax, a finale of a game should be. I've talked about this concept before, with regard to Mass Effect as well. A finale should be something that actually takes the elements, the themes, the core importance of whatever, of whatever has come before, and really makes it come together in this one moment. Final Fantasy VI is a fantastic example of that, for example. But there are other games. Mass Effect 2 was another good one. This is exactly what this was. It took the triple gameplay, the three protagonists, the mindset, and the theme, which I'll be covering in just a moment here again, and really shoved it together. These people banding together, the switched gameplay, taking out all the people who had wronged them, cleaning up the loose ends, and refusing to continue to exist, to survive within this system anymore. Loved this section, but damn it, excuse me. I'm still kind of having issues. Now I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. Like I said, I truly expected to die somewhere along the lines in this way. I was genuinely surprised when the credits started to roll. But nothing made me smile more than when the quest objective, when I was playing as Trevor, said, kidnap David Weston, or Dave Weston, whatever his name is, not kill. I actually got some weird looks because I started laughing, and I'm told that when I am truly amused by something like that, my genuine laugh is incredibly terrifying. I'm not sure what to make of that. But I was so amused by that because of what I'm about to tell you. In that system, I've already covered in brief, the concept of the system, the concept of the machine, if you want to be, if you want to really talk it up, be dramatic about it. The idea that this is this horribleness and unpleasantness, that everyone's just the cogs in this. There's always going to be, this is true in real life too, there's always going to be individuals who are different. Now, I want to talk briefly about something. People are complicated, interesting, multi-layered, in-depth things, okay? That's really, I know that sounds like a duh, but a lot of people don't really think about that, especially what that means. It is very difficult for any standard, normal, rational human being to hate one other human being, to hate that person right there, because that person is a person. They have layers, they have complexity, they have a past. There is so much that makes up even one life that is so difficult to truly hate. And I do mean hate, by the way. To truly look down upon, to look at with that kind of revilish rage, or to see them as inconsequential and expendable. It's difficult to do that unless you distance yourselves from them. As a segue to explain what I mean, it is much easier to hate a label or to look down upon a label than it is a person. It's one of the reasons why we do things like we say, well, that's a... I'm not going to give examples. I don't feel like it. Every example you could possibly give has been used, all the way down to hair length. Any example of something you could qualify as a classification has been used. Well, that's a blank person. They have this. I'll use a fictional example. That's a nobody. That's a heartless. It's easier to do... Okay, heartless is a bad example. It's easier to look at that and say, that is just, there's nothing to that, than to actually look at that person and actually deal with them on that level. Now, on that being said, In real life and in fiction, it is a difficult task to take or individuals in this case, like the protagonist, where you are a violent, unpleasant person, and make the antagonists worse. And several people tend to go with what I like to call the Captain Planet route, because they just make them cartoonishly, stupidly, overly evil. And while that can work, depending on the circumstances, shrug, you know? I mean, what else do I have to add to that? GTA 5 did something much more interesting and much more compelling, and this is why I was so happy that I was going to make that guy suffer. Because guys like him exist in real life. Guys like David Weston and Steve Haynes and all the other people who are like him and them within GTA 5 and in real life are people who, and I'm just going to say this flat out, are wrong. There is something fundamentally wrong with these people. They have chosen, by will and purpose, throughout the course of their lives, to decide to not look at other people and see people. To not look at others and see anything that is relevant or matters. To not have any redeeming qualities whatsoever. And that's the important part right there. I've talked about this before. What makes a good villain? Well, there's really, when it comes down to it, there's two types of good villains. There's ones that you like seeing, and there's ones you really hate seeing. And and the difference really comes down to, from a writer's perspective, do they have any redeeming qualities whatsoever? Are they funny? Are they interesting? Are they charismatic? Do they have a sympathetic background? Do they care about this? Do they care about that? Is there some layers or depth to them that adds that? Now, I'm not saying you don't have layers or depth to this type of villain. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they are repulsive in every single layer and aspect. When I say unredeemable, I am not speaking facetiously. I know the term unforgivable, for example, is used so casually when they don't actually mean that. I mean this. They are irredeemable. There is nothing positive that can be said about these individuals. They are a cancerous, disgusting growth that exists only to make the machine and the system worse in order to benefit themselves personally. Like I said, these kind of people exist in real life. Forgive me for getting a little bit fired up about this. I do not like people like that. And I do not apologize for that. Michael himself actually said it best. You thought you were big enough and bad enough that you didn't have to pay. He paraphrased. That's exactly that mindset. It wasn't about the money. Money's a tool. And there are, of course, people who love money and spend people. I'm not talking about that. But for people in that position, it's not about the money. It's about the fact that they're on top of it. That they're better. That they're superior. All the way through the trip, as I'm driving him in my car's trunk towards his doom, he's constantly trying to talk Trevor out of this. And I couldn't help but smile the whole way, because it's so, if I didn't already, I already thought this just hammered it in. It so emphasized his character. The thought that he could be brought down by a thug was literally alien to him. The thought that someone could show up and shoot all his guards and break all his stuff and take him was something so inconceivable. Now, if you don't understand why, I'm going to explain it with one word. Consequence. The reason people like that within the system are so powerful is because the system exists to make consequences that most people are not willing to deal with in order to prevent them from doing so. Trevor didn't care about those consequences. And our good friend there could not understand that, could not mentally function. He was like breaking down. His sanity was breaking down because he could not understand why this person was doing what he was doing and getting away with it. There was going to be something he could do to fix this situation, because that's how the system works. And that's why I loved the ending so much, in a nutshell. Because even though things may turn out terribly for our heroes, what they did was true defiance. Because defiance is not hope. Do not confuse the two. Defiance is not saying, I am going to beat this, I am going to succeed, despite all the odds. Defiance is saying, I don't care. if I succeed. I don't care if I win. I don't care if I come out of this with a happy ending. Defiance is saying that I am going to look at this thing and say that this is sufficiently wrong to me and to that which I believe and represent, that I'm going to stand up against it and say no. As the culmination of not only Grand Theft Auto 5, but of the entire Grand Theft Auto series, this was the perfect finale and climax. To stand up against this system which we have helped build in the last GTA games, in the previous games, and has been so hammered into us, especially in 4 and 5, and say, no. God, it almost brings a tear to my eye. How wonderfully, beautifully artistic that is, and how wonderful it works like that. I loved the ending. A lot. Yes, the ending, only one. And I'm afraid I actually don't think I actually have anything else to add to that. I really wanted to talk about this with you guys, though, and share this with you. I imagine a few people will be disagreeing with me, and that's acceptable. I mean, we all think differently. I'm sure Tall is going to say that he would have preferred if the ending was bland and boring and incredibly depressing. It's his style. But while I have certainly enjoyed this game, that ending just clinched it for me. Grand Theft Auto 5 is a masterpiece. An absolute tour de force. Its writing, its theme, its story, its presentation, its gameplay is all just incredible. Definite props to the game. I highly recommend it, even though I just ruined everything for you, if you haven't already picked it up. I, therefore, will now be going, and I will see you on the flip side.